Hi, it's Pete, Mindwiseman's channel, aka Maverick Outdoors, and you can see I'm just about to go out on the trek and trail. The latter part of 2018 I uploaded a video to say that I'd be doing the Everest Base Camp Trail this year in 2019. It's something that's been close to my heart ever since I can remember. Even when I was a very young age, I was always interested in the Himalayas, Nepal, Tibet. I've got my itinerary, the plan of action of what I'll be doing when I actually go out there, the route that I'll be taking, the group that I'll be going with. It's a very small group that organises treks to Everest Base Camp and all the surrounding area. They've been established now for a number of years, whereby the people they use, the Sherpas, the guides, the porters, they use the same people every single time with the expeditions they organise around the Everest and Nepal region. But in the future I'll be giving reviews on some of the kit that I'll be taking, the whys and wherefores, all that sort of thing, and some of the route that I'll be taking when I do the 11-day trek, up to 4 to 8 hours a day trekking, and acclimatising at 2 locations for 2 nights so that your body can reproduce more red blood cells, because the altitude is the main concern and the main thing to consider when you're actually trekking in that sort of region. I could have arranged to do it solo on my own, made my way over there, contacted some Sherpas, guides, porters, that sort of thing, and then arranged my own accommodation in the tea houses, which are very, very basic accommodation along the trail. But you know what, I didn't want to. I didn't mind spending a few £100 more to actually get the trip organised for me, so that I could actually enjoy the route and the experience without having to be sort of like technical and feel I was on a mission. So hence going with this small group of people. One of the Sherpas that I'll be with has summited Everest twice. His father is a professional guide and Sherpa out there. But just to sort of clarify a few things, you can have porters and also guides, but they might not necessarily be Sherpas. The word Sherpa basically designates the culture and the people that actually live in that Nepalese region. Sherpas are porters and guides. What tends to happen is, if a Sherpa who lives in that region from many generations wants to get a career in that area with trekking and Everest Base Camp and that sort of thing, they normally serve what would be considered an apprenticeship, whereby before they can be a guide, they have to be a porter, so that then when they do become a guide and Sherpa out on the terrain, they can actually appreciate what is involved with being a porter. So basically it's the step of the rungs of the ladder of actually becoming a full Sherpa guide. There are guides and porters who carry kit on behalf of the trekkers, who might not actually be Sherpas but come from nearby regions. But by going with this small group of people when I am going at this time of year, which will be the peak season, I've just got to initiate the flight independently myself from London Heathrow to Kathmandu. Then when I arrive at Kathmandu, everything is taken care of. I can just sit back or just walk back, chill, and this group of people take over. I meet the Sherpas, I meet the guides, the porters, that sort of thing. Then we spend a day in Kathmandu, and then the 3rd day of my arrival we fly to Lukla, which is classed as the most dangerous airport in the world, which is basically built into the side of the Nepalese mountains, and the runway is about the length of an aircraft carrier. The small 15 to 20 seater aircraft that fly from Kathmandu, it's about 30-35 minute flight to Lukla airport, which is the only point of access to actually get into that Nepalese region and then start the Everest Base Camp or go to any of the surrounding areas, especially where some of the national parks are, which I'll be trekking through the boundary when I actually go out there this year. As I say, in the future I'll be explaining some of the kit that I'll be taking and going a little bit more in depth into the actual trek and what's involved with some of this itinerary. Over the 11 days trekking, as I say, there's going to be 2 separate days where you stay 2 nights in those 2 locations to acclimatise, and it's basically getting that. You can be as fit as a fiddle, you can be really fit and healthy, but if you've never experienced high altitude before, you just don't know the biochemistry of your body, how it's going to respond to it. I'll go into a little bit of how I'm going to approach that subject and aspects of it, so that at least I can try and achieve my aim of doing the Everest Base Camp as comfortable as possible in really good condition, so that I can just enjoy the experience rather than getting halfway through and it just becomes a real physical grind, because maybe, you know, one doesn't actually get prepared for it physically, which is a very important thing. Hence me being out on the trek this afternoon, which I'll be explaining a little bit more about and the reasons behind it when you actually see me doing it in a moment. So there's always somebody that knows someone who is quite sort of maybe mature in their age, you know, retirement age or something, didn't train, didn't exercise, never done anything, maybe just took their dog out for a walk and successfully did the Everest Base Camp. But the majority of people that don't sort of get prepared for it physically at least 3 to 4 months beforehand end up injuring themselves, twisting their ankles, losing coordination, getting halfway through the trek and probably succeed, but can't really enjoy it because they're struggling with their fitness, trying to adapt to the altitude. Now, the altitude in itself is the major concern for people, because of course you can get acute mountain sickness, and if that happens, which is fluid on the brain, fluid on the lungs, it can kill people, and it does. The statistics for the Everest Base Camp Trail, there's no actual official statistics, but they reckon on average, if people aren't getting hooked over the side of the trail down the mountain edge from a yak that's transporting a load of kit, there's a highway code. You always stop for any of the porters, any of the Sherpas that are carrying kit, and also the yak trails where you step to the inside of the mountain. So the risk factors regarding doing the Everest Base Camp Trail, if you don't get hook-horned over by the yaks down the edge of the mountain, and they reckon there's maybe up to maybe half a dozen people that end their lives that way from not considering the safety factors of what you should do when the yaks are approaching you, is being aware of your environment, what's going on. It's not preparing for it, not being physically able, you know, trekking for 11 days, it's going to take its toll on the body, even for the most fittest and conditioned people. But the main aspect is the altitude sickness, and is acclimatization, is actually letting yourself rest. You elevate, you then come back down, you rest, your body's biochemistry changes, and you need to do that at least twice. So that's why I'll be staying over 2 nights in 2 separate locations as I approach and get nearer to over 5,200 metres Everest Base Camp, and then up to 5,500 metres on Kalapatar, which is a small little mountainous area higher than the base camp itself, and that's what I really like to achieve. So in this itinerary plan of action, I've got everything in here. What day I'll be travelling to a certain location, from Tengboche to Namche Bazaar, but I'll be explaining a lot about that sort of in the near future. But a lot of people have asked me and said, will I be filming it? Silly question, of course I will. I'm definitely going to be videoing the whole of the trek from start to finish, and include it on the channel when I get back. So since October last year, 2018, everything's been booked, everything's been provisionally put in place. And just something about insurance as well. I'll probably get questions from people saying, oh, yeah, make sure you get insured. I know everything from A to Z of what I've actually got to do, hence obviously within the itinerary. But the insurance policy when you're doing Everest Base Camp, for virtually every single company that will insure you, they have a specific policy that is for people that are going to do the Everest Base Camp Trail. Not necessarily mountain climbing, because that puts a slightly different category on it, but it will cover you up to over 6,000 metres above sea level, and specifically for the Everest Base Camp. So if anything happens and you had to get medically evacuated out by a helicopter because you get acute mountain sickness, then you need to be taken down to lower levels as soon as possible, or given hospital treatment, and that normally means medevac out by helicopter. And if you don't take out insurance, that's going to cost you about £10,000–12,000 expense if you don't take out that policy beforehand. There are companies that will organise for you to do the Everest Base Camp Trail or similar within that area, but they are sometimes an agency, so they'll use separate people. The group that I'm going with, they use the same people from start to finish, so they're reputable, they're responsible, they're safe and secure, and reliable. So that's why I wanted to go with these people, because I wanted all the pressure taken off. So I don't mind the adventure of things being a bit unpredictable and trying to find my own Sherpa and then map reading and all that sort of thing. But that puts a different dimension on it, and also I'm limited to the 3 weeks from start to finish, whereas I would have probably spent maybe a month, 6 weeks of doing it solo on my own, because that's how I would have liked to have done it. But it wasn't practical for the time of year that I can go, considering all the other obligations that I've got during 2019. It just so happens it's the most popular time of year when I'm going. It's going to be the busiest. There's tens of thousands of people that do part of the Everest Base Camp Trail, if not all the way to Everest Base Camp. And a lot of the trekkers maybe will just want to experience part of the Nepalese area up to Namche Bazaar, which is the main Sherpa town. And not necessarily maybe want to do base camp. So I'll be passing people that will be endeavouring to do what I'm doing, and also just mainly sightseers that might not be doing the full trail itself. A lot of people that do want to get to Everest Base Camp, the failures are either because they don't acclimatise properly, they can be with unscrupulous companies who might take them out there and rush to get up there, and there have been some pretty bad horror stories of some companies that will rush people to get to the Everest Base Camp, not let them acclimatise at the right rate, and they end up getting altitude sickness. But these people, unscrupulous tourist guides, can actually be in the pocket of the medical companies or the helicopter companies. They get a backhander and a percentage, because then the insurance company has to pay out the however many thousands of pounds to get that person shipped out and get them helicoptered out as soon as possible before they die, because they've got altitude sickness. Hence finding someone reputable or someone that's got good references and then letting them take the responsibility so you can actually enjoy the time out there, which is what I'm going to be doing. So the time of year that I'm going is going to be mild temperatures. During the day it can be anything from 15 to 20 degrees. It can be t-shirt, shorts, trekking weather, but then by late afternoon, come early evening, the temperatures really change, and at night you can get down to real low sub-zeros. I know all about the importance of hydration. It's not just about being thirsty from trekking the trail, it's about how the biochemistry of the body starts to change. And to keep altitude sickness at bay, you just need to keep hydrated as much as possible, because it helps other processes that your body's responding to at altitude, at high altitude. So the hydration, anything from 3 to 4 litres a day minimum, is advised. Side effects that you get from going high altitude can be similar to altitude sickness, but it's just simply a side effect of being in low oxygen levels, whereby you can lose your appetite, you can have lack of sleep, and you can have pretty bad headaches. But it's down to the Sherpas and you knowing beforehand the symptoms to look for, so that you know it is just a simple side effect where you can keep going, or it's not on borderline where it can be acute mountain sickness, which is then the danger zone of your health. Okay, so this sounds all very negative, but it's things that you need to consider. So it's just preparation, getting well prepared, getting a good mindset before you go, which actually brings me now back to the trek. So join me now back on the trek and trail, and I can explain a few more things. It's windy and blustery. It's about 3:30 in the afternoon, and I'm out for a 5-mile trek one way and a 5-mile trek back the other, so it's about 10 miles in total. And the route is up what's called Wayfarer's Walk, or otherwise known as Watership Down, after the name of a cartoon film. That the story Watership Down was written by a man in this area and based it on this scenery and terrain. It's got lots of different terrain. As you can tell from the previous scene, I'm walking up a slope. Then there's peaks and troughs, different areas. That's why I've come up here, just to train and get ready for Everest Base Camp in May. So I've just come from way down there, and the gradient's still a little bit more uphill. So this video is just to quickly touch base and follow on from the end of last year about me doing Everest Base Camp, which I'm going to be doing
in May this year, just over 3 months' time. As a lot of my subscribers who follow my channel and my outdoors activities know, I always try and keep in condition. Considering as a personal trainer at a major sports facility for 20 years, so I like to apply my skills and knowledge, not just helping people over the years, but myself, especially this experience of a lifetime. So that was an incline stretch for about 1.5 miles. Now I've got a slope to take. So I've got a bit of respite coming down this slope, but of course on the way back I've got to come back up it. Okay, so it is easier obviously going with gravity down a slope, but you've still got to use some sort of muscular control in your legs, especially if it starts to go downwards steep, so you don't actually fall. So you're still sort of controlling your muscles and need a sort of conditioning for this sort of terrain going downhill as well. But when you're walking into the sunlight, and that's where it's going to be setting near my final destination, then it's a good day. I've got my waterproofs, but it just makes it easier and more to focus on the terrain and what you're doing when it's a nice fine day. So trekking Everest Base Camp Trail, which is the world's highest trekking trail, it's also going into the altitude, so I can do the best I can to sort of condition aerobically and anaerobically, which means without oxygen, i.e. strengthening exercises, which I've been doing more specific for the up and coming event in May since October last year, and it's now actually more specific in the exercise trade or training, physical fitness and health scene. It's called sport specific. So, but obviously I'm not doing a sport, I'm doing an activity, which is going to be the Everest Base Camp Trail, which is going to be 11 days trekking for 4 to 8 hours a day, then going into altitude of up to 50% less oxygen. So, but I'll talk a little bit more about that as we get more into this trek that I'm doing today. But activity specific being trying to replicate what the eventual activity is going to be and replicating that in your training. So, you know, a long distance marathon runner wouldn't train like a short distance sprint runner, or say a gymnast wouldn't necessarily train like a rhythmic or jazz dancer. So it's you know, it's getting your coordination, it's getting your physical awareness and your mindset, and also creating what's called muscle memory, which if you're into exercise and fitness you'll probably know, or even if you're clued up about, you know, the body and how it works. Muscle memory is the experience mentally that you put yourself through and physically, so that when you come to do the actual event you're more prepared for it. So it's like anything really, just practicing. But it's not just about general fitness and getting your aerobics up, it's about making everything specific. And in this case, coming out on this trail that I've come many times before when I've sort of prepared for Brecon Beacons and that sort of thing, which I will be actually doing in a month or two's time. So I've got a road to cross just up here, then it's a little bit of incline, then I'm back to going uphill again. Bring it on. Train hard, play easy. So I've come from up there, coming down the gradient, and now ready to cross this road. So the method to my madness today was I was going to go up one of the terrains I like to go, just for leisurely and also to sort of work the body, on the Roman wall, the old Caliver Bateman Roman wall that I've filmed a number of times. And again, if you follow my channel, you'll have seen it in the past. But the terrain I normally take is quite sort of inclined, sort of more diagonal. But I didn't want to do that as much today. I wanted to go for more of the long distance with a little bit of resistance on slopes and inclines, but not as much as the Roman wall where I sometimes go. And that being because over the past few days I've been doing some strength training. So I didn't want to compound that. So I wanted to get just a little bit more of an endurance with less sort of intensity, so to speak, on the muscles. That means intensity. Now we've got a bit of an incline coming up to those big trees, and then more of a slight incline beyond over there. So after coming down that little bit of slope and what I sort of explained just now, sort of coming up here, I can actually feel it now working in the stability and strength of the muscles. As I say, this video is just to sort of touch base, follow on from the end of last year, as I had quite a lot of response from people wishing me luck with Everest Base Camp, wanting to know sort of when I'm going, the kit, that sort of thing. But I can explain more about that in the near future. But as I say, it's just to touch base and share with you some of the ideas and principles of what I'm doing to get ready for it. So as I go up a little bit further, you can see where I've come from, beyond that ridge, follow the tree line, and right over yonder. So knowing today that I wanted a bit of sort of endurance without too much resistance on the incline on my legs, hence doing what I'm doing today in the chilly breeze. So my destination is further along there, and the ancient Iron Age fort is right over the top. But then I'm going to go downhill, so that when I come back, I've got to come back uphill on an inclined slope, very similar to the one that I did starting this Wayfarer's Walk, which for centuries, hundreds of years, was a main trade route from part of West England to southeast England. But it's a lovely trail to come out that's got public access.
Okay, before I continue with the next stage of the trek, just to clarify about what are known as the oxygen reduction masks, or acclimatization altitude training mask. It doesn't replicate the low pressure, dry air and low oxygen content in the air at altitude. Normally anything from 2,500 meters above sea level is when it starts to kick in and affect the human body if you're not used to actually being in that sort of terrain and that altitude. If you imagine at altitude, a volume of air will have only a certain percentage of oxygen, so not only is the air dry, the pressure is low, that affects the biochemistry of the body as well. But if we're talking about respiration, that volume of air at high altitude has got a smaller amount of oxygen. Now, in the environment that I'm in, I haven't got any problems with respiration because my body's evolved and is used to the volume of air that has a bigger volume and percentage of oxygen that my body adapts to and functions on. So out on the trek, what this mask is going to do for me, I can close with the lever and take less air coming in through the vent, which in turn makes my diaphragm have to work a bit harder. It strengthens my lungs and basically conditions, just like any other exercise, the breathing mechanism of the body. So with the reduction of air and the oxygen that I'm normally used to, it takes it down to a smaller amount where I have to work harder to get that oxygen into the blood flow to keep the body working and the muscles functioning. But of course at altitude it's totally different. The volume of air that you're breathing has got a smaller amount of oxygen, and this mask doesn't replicate that. All it does, it gets you used to the feeling of actually exerting yourself at altitude. But the difference of actually maybe achieving Everest Base Camp is whether or not you walk at 2 miles an hour compared to 3 miles an hour, albeit you feel you can actually walk at a reasonable pace. Sometimes it's a good idea, anticipating you're going to go into a high altitude, maybe within a few hours, you still keep the pace very low, so that when you get to that more challenging altitude, your body's a little bit more stable to be able to contend with it. So basically using the mask and training with it is replicating for me, getting that sort of mindset, that feeling, so that when it happens at altitude, it's not so much of a shock to the system and the mind. When I get to altitude and it becomes a little bit of a struggle and a bit of a challenge, I'm more used to that sort of process by using the mask in the first place and getting used to that feeling and condition. Also, another consideration for me personally is that over the past 10 years I've been somewhat incapacitated and not been able to do some of the physical things I've wanted to do, albeit I've been able to do some of the things I've wanted to, but say with Everest Base Camp trek and trail and long distance trekking, I've not been able to do due to leg conditions that I've had. But over the past 2 years I've had major leg surgery whereby parts of the upper part of my legs and hips have been replaced with metal rods, bits of plastic and bits of ceramic, whereby all the scar tissue, the muscle tissue has had to be strengthened through physio, rehab, that sort of thing. And there's exercises I would do anyway, but I have to actually do for life to keep the muscles stabilising where all the surgery and repair has been done. So the distance that I'm going to be trekking, the different terrain, up and down the altitude and everything, is going to obviously take its toll on the body, hence getting ready for it, preparing for it physically. But of course, it's not a big concern, but I don't know how my joints are going to actually bear out with it. So I've just got to do the best I can so that after this major surgery, I've got the best ability. So my main personal consideration has been making sure that everything is stable within my body, so the replacement, repaired parts of my legs and joints can actually contend with the challenge of actually doing Everest Base Camp and the train, considering how long it's going to be over those 11 days. So it's simply doing the best that I can do to make sure that everything physical is ready, and also mentally as well, so that I'm prepared to be able to do it as easy as possible. Still going to be a challenge, but at least doing it with best practice. And just a final little point before we go back onto the trek. Some people feel that the tourists are taking advantage of the Sherpas, the guides, the porters and all that sort of thing. Basically, in a nutshell, I've heard many stories from Sherpas who welcome the tourist trade. It puts well-needed money into the economy, the Nepalese economy. Plus as well, it's well monitored out there. You need permits at certain areas, checkpoints along the trail. So it's not just willy-nilly gung-ho, everyone just steams into the Everest Base track and does what they want. It's very well monitored, and all of the people that work and live in that area welcome the tourism because it brings income. And a lot of them say that, you know, that is their environment. They love the mountains, and if they can work there and other people are interested in coming to see their country, they welcome them. And it's also business as well, and the Sherpa and the Nepalese culture are very, very benevolent and accommodating, and that's actually what I'm looking forward to, is experience some of the culture and living with some of those people. Let's get back on the trek and using this oxygen reduction mask.
Okay, so now I've got the mask off, I can talk and breathe properly. I've just unloaded some snacks, and there's my water to go bottle. I don't have to fill water, just take it out of the tap and put it in a normal bottle. But I've just brought that because I prefer the taste out of it. And I've got 2 full 1 litre drinks bottles, but actually just filled up with water after I'd used the fizzy drink out of them. I've got 1 each side, but I've just used those for weight. I could also, they've been in this rucksack. Been in the rucksack for maybe 5-6 weeks since I've been using the rucksack and going out trekking and training. So I'll leave those in there. If I did run out of drinking water and need to use that, I'll just put it in the water to go bottle, and it's going to filter it out if it was a bit stale or got a bit contaminated, because obviously it's been left in there for well over 4 or 5 weeks. First aid kit, utility pouch with torch, multi-tool, EDC stuff. I've got some new waterproof trousers, but I'll talk about these another time. And also I've got a new waterproof jacket with multi-zips. It's a really good sort of, I don't know if you want to call it tactical smock, but it's waterproof Gore-Tex, it's French Army, but I might weigh that on the way back because it's getting a bit breezy. Just use it as a bit of a windshield. But that's a new one that I'm going to be taking with me. And then the mask goes into this self-containing box that comes with Keep It Protected. So that's all my stuff in there. So I was sort of trekking with about maybe about 9-10 kilos. But when I'm out on the Everest Base Camp Trail, I'll only be having a backpack with maybe 5-6 kilos in it, a lot of water, because you need to keep hydrated. Sort of anything from 3 to 4 litres. So I'll be carrying that, and just waterproof snacks, that sort of thing. So you can see now it's getting a bit dusky. That's where the sun was setting, so you can imagine I've come from well over there, right over there, and in the distance beyond those trees and beyond whatever you can see on the horizon. But this is a little stop-off point that I've used a number of times when I've trekked out here, and it's normally sort of shielded away from the breeze. So I'm just going to sit here on the mat so it cushions the hardness of the tree trunk and also the dampness that's on it, and just have a little comfy sit down, recharge my batteries, have a little bit of a rest, breathe normally with no oxygen reduction training mask, have my brew and my biscuit, which are just next to me on that little self-made mouldy, earthy, rooty shelf. So just using the practical space around me. So of course you can imagine when I trek back it's going to be the same route but in reverse. So what I'll do now is I'll take you back to my office and finish this video, but thanks for watching this part, and I'll see you in the next bit. So I left the woods and took the incline back up to the ancient Iron Age fort, and by the time I arrived there it was night time, it was dark, there was a chill in the air, the sky was nice and clear, could see all the star constellations and the moon. But the 5-mile trek back I kept the oxygen reduction mask on, but I didn't open the vent that much because I kept the intake of air down to a minimum so that I had to adjust my physical activity to be slower and maintain the ability to still breathe within that restriction, if that makes sense, whilst actually keeping my activity level low. So I was adjusting it to the lack of oxygen that I was being able to breathe in. So you'll see me actually adjust to that, which obviously replicates how you adjust at high altitude to adjust to the lack of oxygen, so you slow down the pace and create an exertion that you can maintain within that lack of oxygen. So I hope that makes sense. At this point, say thanks for watching. There will be more updates with more information on my kit and that sort of thing, and I'll catch you in another video soon. Cheers, take care.